Chapter 2 of This Crowded Earth. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Reading by Greg Marguerite. This Crowded Earth by Robert Bloch. Chapter 2. Harry Collins, 1998. It took them 10 seconds to save Harry from falling, but it took him over 10 weeks to regain his balance. In fact, over 2 months had passed before he could fully realize just what had happened, or where he was now. They must have noticed something was wrong with him that morning at the office, because 2 supervisors and an exec rushed in and caught him just as he was going out the window. And then they had sent him away, sent him here. "This is fine," he told Dr. Manshoff. "If I'd known how well they treated you, I'd have gone couch happy years ago." Dr. Manshoff's plump face was impassive, but the little laugh lines deepened around the edges of his eyes. "Maybe that's why we take such care not to publicize our recent advances in mental therapy," he said. "Everybody would want to get into a treatment center, and then where would we be?" Harry nodded, staring past the doctor's shoulder, staring out of the wide window at the broad expanse of rolling countryside beyond. "I still don't understand, though," he murmured. "How can you possibly manage to maintain an institution like this, with all the space and the luxuries? The inmates seem to lead better lives than the adjusted individuals outside. It's topsy-turvy." "Perhaps." Dr. Manshoff's fingers formed a pudgy steeple. "But then, so many things seem to be topsy-turvy nowadays, don't they? Wasn't it the realization of this fact which precipitated your own recent difficulties?" "Almost precipitated me bodily out of that window," Harry admitted cheerfully. "And that's another thing. I was sent here, I suppose, because I'd attempted suicide, gone into shock, temporary amnesia, something like that." "Something like that," the doctor echoed, contemplating his steeple. "But you didn't give me any treatment," Harry continued. "Oh, I was kept under sedation for a while, I realize that, and you and some of the other staff members talked to me. But mainly I just rested in a nice big room and ate nice big meals." "So?" The steeple's fleshy spire collapsed. "So what I want to know is, when does the real treatment start? When do I go into analysis or chemotherapy and all that?" Dr. Manshoff shrugged. "Do you think you need those things right now?" Harry gazed out at the sunlight beyond the window, half squinting and half frowning. "No, come to think of it, I don't believe I do. I feel better now than I have in years." His companion leaned back. "Meaning that for years you felt all wrong, because you were constricted, physically, psychically, and emotionally. You were cramped, squeezed in a vise until the pressure became intolerable. But now that pressure has been removed. As a result, you no longer suffer, and there is no need to seek escape in death or denial of identity. This radical change of attitude has been brought about here in just a little more than 2 months' time, and yet you're asking me when the real treatment begins." "I guess I've already had the real treatment then, haven't I?" "That is correct. Prolonged analysis or drastic therapy is unnecessary. We've merely given you what you seemed to need." "I'm very grateful," Harry said, "but how can you afford to do it?" Dr. Manshoff built another temple to an unknown god. He inspected the architecture critically now as he spoke. "Because your problem is a rarity," he said. "Rarity? I'd have thought millions of people would be breaking down every month. The naturalists say—" The doctor nodded wearily. "I know what they say, but let's dismiss rumors and consider facts. Have you ever read any official report stating that the number of cases of mental illness ran into the millions?" "No, I haven't." "For that matter, do you happen to know of anyone who was ever sent to a treatment center such as this?" "Well, of course, everybody goes in to see the medics for regular checkups, and this includes an interview with a psych. But if they're in bad shape, he just puts them on extra tranquilizers. I guess sometimes he reviews their vocational apt tests and shifts them over into different jobs in other areas." Dr. Manshoff bowed his head in reverence above the steeple, as if satisfied with the labors he had wrought. "That is roughly correct, and I believe, if you search your memory, you won't recall even a mention of a treatment center. This sort of place is virtually extinct nowadays. There are still some institutions for those suffering from functional mental disorders, paresis, senile dementia, congenital abnormalities, but regular checkups and preventative therapy take care of the great majority. We've ceased concentrating on the result of mental illness and learned to attack the causes. It's the old yellow fever problem all over again, you see. Once upon a time, physicians dealt exclusively with treatment of yellow fever patients. Then they shifted their attention to the source of the disease. They went after the mosquitoes, drained the swamps, and the yellow fever problem vanished. That's been our approach in recent years. We've developed social therapy, and so the need for individual therapy has diminished. What were the sources of the tensions producing mental disturbances? Physical and financial security, the threat of war, the aggressive patterns of a competitive society, the unresolved Oedipus situation rooted in the old-style family relationship. These were the swamps where the mosquitoes buzzed and bit. Most of the swamps have been dredged, most of the insects exterminated. Today we're moving into a social situation where nobody goes hungry, nobody is jobless or unprovided for, nobody needs to struggle for status. Vocational apt determines a man's rightful place and function in society, and there's no longer the artificial distinction imposed by race, color, or creed. War is a thing of the past. Best of all, the old-fashioned home life, with all of its unhealthy emotional ties, is being replaced by sensible conditioning when a child reaches school age. The umbilical cord is no longer a permanent leash, a strangler's noose, or a silver-plated lifeline stretching back to the womb. Harry Collins nodded. I suppose only the exceptional cases ever need to go to a treatment center like this. Exactly. But what makes me one of the exceptions? Is it because of the way the folks brought me up in a small town with all the old-fashioned books and everything? Is that why I hated confinement and conformity so much? Is it because of all the years I spent reading? And why? Dr. Manshoff stood up. You tempt me, he said. You tempt me strongly, as you can see. I dearly love a lecture and a captive audience. But right now, the audience must not remain captive. I prescribe an immediate dose of freedom. You mean I'm to leave here? Is that what you want to do? Frankly, no. Not if it means going back to my job. That hasn't been decided upon. We can discuss the problem later, and perhaps we can go into the answers to those questions you just posed. But at the moment, I'd suggest you stay with us, though without the restraint of remaining in your room or in the wards. In other words, I want you to start going outside again. Outside? You'll find several square miles of open country just beyond the doors here. You're at liberty to wander around and enjoy yourself. Plenty of fresh air and sunshine. Come and go as you wish. I've already issued instructions which permit you to keep your own hours. Meals will be available when you desire them. You're very kind. Nonsense. I'm prescribing what you need, and when the time comes, we'll arrange to talk again. You know where to find me. Dr. Manshoff dismantled his steeple and placed a half of the roof in each trouser pocket. And Harry Collins went outdoors. It was wonderful just to be free and alone, like returning to that faraway childhood in Wheaton once again. Harry appreciated every minute of it during the first week of his wandering. But Harry wasn't a child anymore, and after a week he began to wonder instead of wander. The grounds around the treatment center were more than spacious. They seemed absolutely endless. No matter how far he walked during the course of a day, Harry never encountered any walls, fences, or artificial boundaries. There was nothing to stay his progress but the natural barriers of high, steeply slanting precipices which seemed to rim all sides of a vast valley. Apparently the center itself was set in the middle of a large canyon, a canyon big enough to contain an airstrip for helicopter landings. The single paved road leading from the main buildings terminated at the strip, and Harry saw helicopters arrive and depart from time to time. Apparently they brought in food and supplies. As for the center itself, it consisted of 4 large structures, 2 of which Harry was familiar with. The largest was made up of apartments for individual patients and staffed by nurses and attendants. Harry's own room was here, on the 2nd floor, and from the beginning he'd been allowed to roam around the communal halls below at will. The second building was obviously administrative. Dr. Manshoff's private office was situated therein, and presumably the other staff members operated out of here. The other 2 buildings were apparently inaccessible, not guarded or policed or even distinguished by signs prohibiting access, but merely locked and unused. At least, Harry had found the doors locked when, out of normal curiosity, he had ventured to approach them. Nor had he ever seen anyone enter or leave the premises. Perhaps these structures were unnecessary under the present circumstances and had been built for future accommodations. Still, Harry couldn't help wondering. And now, on this particular afternoon, he sat on the bank of the little river which ran through the valley, feeling the midsummer sun beating down upon his forehead and staring down at the eddying current with its ripples and reflections. Ripples and reflections. Dr. Manshoff had answered his questions well, yet new questions had arisen. Most people didn't go crazy anymore, the doctor had explained, and so there were very